This is chapter 37. May it relax you. This chapter is titled Sannyas. S-A-N-Y-A-S. It's a beautiful Sanskrit word that relates to letting go. Taking sannyas is what they call it when, under a guru, you vow to let go of material life and dedicate yourself to the spiritual path. They call it taking sannyas. It literally means renunciation. And then you become a sannyasi, which is a renunciate. So, let's read. This takes place in June 11th in the year 2000. I was not yet born. The moon hung low in the sky as though perched on the ridge of the Himalayan foothills. Slightly bigger than a half moon, but far from full, she illuminated the morning into which twilight was now emerging. It was just past 3:30 in the morning. I had been awake all night. That morning, as the sun would begin its ascent over the mountains, I was going to be initiated into sannyas. Wow! What a special opportunity this chapter will be to understand such a surreal moment in some spiritual seekers' journeys. We listened to another Swami take sannyas under the guidance of his guru in another book that we read, Roar the Ganges. This book actually takes place in a very similar part of India, also in Rishikesh, near the banks of the Ganga, the holy river where many people get initiated into the Hindu monk fold. Is that a word? Monk fold? Monkhood? Anyway, I trust that you know what I mean. So, this is a very private ceremony, and I'm grateful to be able to go through the process with you. I was going to be initiated into sannyas. Layers of false self would be washed off me, and I would emerge from the waters of Ganga as a newborn child from the womb of the mother, untouched, untainted, unafraid. I would emerge as the unclothed fullness and truth of myself, whole, complete, and pure. Divine, a vessel through which God's will would flow unencumbered by ego. I sat on the cool marble steps. The ghat was still mostly empty, but today, being Ganga Dusehra, the day that the goddess Ganga descended from heaven in the form of a river, the crowds would come earlier than usual for a ceremonial bath. For that moment, though, I sat alone, my back against the round pillar at the water's edge, the same spot I'd sat nearly 4 years earlier when Ganga flowed not only beside me, but also from my eyes. That was the moment, if we recall back to near the beginning of this book, where she had her spiritual awakening. And all of this has followed since. It was here that I had come to put my feet in the water that day, that Jim, my past husband, and I had arrived in Rishikesh. It was here, looking out over the river I didn't even know was sacred, that I had the first vision of the divine. It was here I had already been given a new life. Now it would be ceremonially sanctified. I closed my eyes and chanted my mantra in my mind. The only sound was that of the waves of Ganga, rising slowly with the melting glacial snow, breaking on the steps and occasionally splashing over my bare feet. As I sat there, the waves began to flow, not only in front of me, but also through me, crashing on the steps of the marble and on the edges and corners of my being. I could hear and feel the water rushing into my mind, coursing through my thought patterns, loosening my hardened reactions and identities. As wave after wave broke inside me, each carried away a part of my identity, ebbing from the shore of my awareness into Ganga's waters, to be dumped into the ocean past the Bay of Bengal. As I sat, the sloshing and breaking of the waves within me got louder, and I realized that the space had increased. As each wave carried another part of me out to sea, the emptiness inside grew. I sat. The water flowed over my toes, and just as palpably, through my mind and through the container of myself, the gong of the clock tower at 4 o'clock pulled me back to the present moment. Pujya Swami Guru Sharananandji Maharaj, the saint who had inquired how much soup is too much soup, and who had first pronounced me as Bhagawati, told me I could come get him after 4, and we'd go together to Pujya Swamiji, my Guru. I rose, then dropped again back onto the marble steps. Ganga had reached beyond her banks into my chest and pulled my heart. I lay with my face on the wet step and stretched my arms out in front of me, my legs behind. I lay flat on the step, the water seeping through my thin white cotton gown and soaking my face. Just take me into you, I prayed. I am always yours. I stood and wrapped a cotton shawl over my chest and shoulders, covering my now wet white cotton gown, and walked up the steps toward the room in the ashram where Maharaji was staying. He had come especially for my sannyas initiation, graciously. When I told him that I really, really wanted him to be there and to do the rites with Pujya Swamiji. Sannyas is an ordination passed down from guru to disciple. Pujya Swamiji is my guru. But the moment I met Maharaji, my heart leapt out of my chest and threw itself at his feet. He is also my guru, and I wanted to take this step by his hand. As my father Frank had held the back of my first two-wheeled bicycle while I cycled around the lot of a vacant gas station, releasing it only briefly until I was strong and steady, I wanted Maharaji to be there for my sannyas, along with Swamiji, to have them both hold me, carry me, and guide me into this new life. I knocked on the door of Maharaji's room, and his disciple answered. "Wait here," he instructed, and went into the back. I stood, vacillating between breathless excitement and breathful stillness. A minute later, Maharaji appeared, the clank of his thick wooden sandals announcing his presence before I could see him in the darkness. I bowed at his feet, and he said, "Ao Rani, Come, Queen. In his presence, I felt less a queen than an infant, but by using nicknames like that, Maharaji continually reminds us of who we really are. Not queen of some finite physical kingdom, but queen of the divine. Maharaji continually reminds us of who we really are. Not queen of some finite physical kingdom, but queen of the divine. I think my internet disconnected me for a second. If it's back, I hope to continue where I left off, and I apologize for any discontinuity in our reading. I'm back, okay. I'll just read one sentence back. I bowed at his feet, and he said, Ao Rani, come, Queen. In his presence, I felt less a queen than an infant, but by using nicknames like that, Maharaji continually reminds us of who we really are. Not queen of some finite physical kingdom, but queen of the divine universe. He walked past me regally, and I stood and followed him up the central ashram pathway to the front door of Swamiji's room. The priest was already there, and upon seeing Maharaji arrive, he gently rang Swamiji's bell. Swamiji walked out into the twilight of breaking dawn. I fell to the ground and bowed at his feet. This incredible being had carried me from the life I knew into a new world. By his gentle yet powerful presence, the curtain had dropped on part one of my life, and the whole drama, all the actors and the entire script of my first 25 years had faded into darkness. Now, being ordained into sannyas, the curtain rose on my life. Part 2. This time, I was to step onto the stage with no costume or script or role, just naked as my only self. As only myself. Swamiji walked out silently. He moves with an unusual grace. I frequently find myself checking the ground to see if his feet are really touching rather than gliding a few inches above the pavement. He and Maharaji bowed lovingly to each other and walked side by side out of the ashram and down the marble steps to the water. Swamiji observed silence 14 hours every day, a practice he began about 20 years ago. Swamiji observed silence 14 hours every day, a practice he began about 20 years ago for 10 hours daily, because I sleep that long. I imagine Swamiji does not sleep that long. So that morning, like all mornings, he did not speak, and Maharaji led the proceedings. Maharaji and Swamiji sat on the steps at the water's edge. Hold the chain and take a dip, Maharaji instructed. There are thick metal chains a few feet long attached to the bottom step for people to hold on to while they bathe, as the current is so strong. I did as he instructed, holding tightly to the chain, my feet buried into the rocks and sand of the riverbed. I squatted low so the water would rush over my head. However, Ganga wasn't interested in gently washing over my head. The swift current swept my feet out from beneath me, and I had to pull hard on the chain to stand back up. Again, he said as I surfaced. It was an invocation, not a command. Maharaji wasn't simply instructing me to dip in the water. His words, the actions that followed, and the prayers that he and Swamiji chanted silently, their lips moving, were part of an ancient, intricate initiation ritual. I wasn't just dunking my head in a river. I was being ordained. Through the words, the prayers, the chants, and the blessings of these two saints, the goddess Ganga anointed me, purified me, washed over and through me, extricating all that was not conducive to a life of renunciation from the crevices of my being. At times of emergency evacuation, when one is given only a few moments to gather up precious belongings and rush out to escape fire, flood, or storm, one has to decide instinctively what matters most, what's worth holding on to. As Maharaji instructed, again, 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 each time I emerged from the current, the self with which I had always identified, the personality, the identity of whom I thought I was, let out a subtle evacuation call within me. My ego reached out its arms and tried to grab hold of anything it could. Fear, abandonment, abuse, desire, longing. The suction cups of its octopus arms scraped against the inner walls of myself, grasping unsuccessfully for something to hold on to. Again and again, I dipped and let the waters carry me. Again and again, the current pulled me until I was horizontal in the water, arms outstretched toward the waning moon as she dipped behind the mountains, the top of which is the glacier from which Ganga descends onto earth. Again, he said, no longer speaking to me, but incanting the words of an ancient rite. 18 times I dipped in Ganga. 18 times she pulled me until I was bowing, face down in the water, toward her source, toward the womb of the mother. Ao, come here, Maharaji said as I emerged the 18th time. Beto, sit down. I sat on the step just beneath him. His hands was a small bowl of black sesame seeds. With each sankalp, each vow, offer the seeds in your right hand to Ganga. Each phrase I chant is another vow. Vows of renunciation, vows of celibacy, vows of simplicity, vows of non-attachment, vows to live only as an instrument of God. The sesame seeds are the medium of offering and promising. I poured a small number of seeds from the steel bowl into my right hand. In Indian tradition, everything is sacred, or even respectful. Everything, that's true, but everything sacred or even respectful is done with the right hand. The left hand is used to clean oneself after using the toilet. Therefore, regardless of the copious amount of soap and water you may use to wash your hands after the toilet, that hand is considered impure. Whenever taking or offering anything, it is always done with the right hand. Eating, even with the utensil, is done only with the right hand. Religious rites and rituals are always done with the right hand. Maharaji spoke the Sanskrit lines softly. They were not meant for my comprehension. I already knew what I was vowing. They were recited as prayer, as a bridge of sound connecting the three of us on the water's edge to the fullest, highest spirit of the divine. They were a bridge to the source of Shakti, the power with which I would be infused. They were a bridge to God, to whom I was surrendering. Handful by handful, I offered the seeds as Maharaji gently rocked back and forth, eyes closed, chanting. Beside him, Swamiji meditated, eyes sometimes closed, sometimes open, locked with Ganga, the lover and the beloved, swimming in each other's boundless gaze. When the ritual vows finished, Maharaji and Swamiji both rose silently and stepped down to the edge of the water. They took water in their right hands and each chanted silently to himself, holding the water in an outstretched cupped palm. Not a drop of water fell from either of their hands. After a few minutes, they both extended their fingers, tipped their hands, and offered the water back to Ganga. Then bent down again and took more water, which they poured into their mouths. The third time they bent, took water in their hands, and held it there. "Come here," Maharaji said. I walked toward them as they turned to face the first rays of sun reaching over the Himalayas. I stood before them and brought my hands together in prayer. Maharaji hadn't told me to pray, but as I beheld these two masters' faces lit by the rising sun with Ganga flowing behind them, I could do nothing else. Maharaji chanted in Sanskrit, and they both splashed the water from their cupped hands onto my head. I was still dripping wet from the 18 baths in Ganga, so I was surprised by how strong these drops of water felt. A light spray of water on a soaked head should be barely perceptible, but these drops landed with such force that each of them seemed to pass through my skull, past the sponge-like grey and white matter of my brain, and into the presence of my mind. These drops splashed onto the energy patterns from which my thoughts arose. With each drop, another thought pattern was washed away, like water bombs destroying the enemy's reserve banks. When the spray ceased, I bowed low on the wet marble steps facing my two gurus. Then I sat up and opened my eyes. Looking up at them, Maharaji took Swamiji's hand and placed them on my head, covering them with his own. There are 4 hands on my head. My eyes closed from the weight of the energy. The physical mass of their hands weighed next to nothing, but the energy was so strong. I felt the roof of my skull crumble under the pressure. The energy poured, unencumbered by the bones of my skull, into and through my brain and mind. My thoughts just stopped. I wasn't frozen, or dead, or comatose. I was fully alive, awake and present, but my mind no longer moved, and where frenetic thoughts had previously raced, now there was space. It didn't feel empty. It was a full emptiness, an empty fullness, a spacious vista opening onto the landscape of stillness. I was still, kneeling at their feet. I could hear Ganga flowing and the voices of people beginning to come to the water for their sacred bath. But these sounds did not enter me. I felt like a structure in one of those snow globes I had as a child. The New York skyline, or a house, or a snowman standing still while, with each shake of the dome, snow flurried around it. The building or snowman stayed unmoving no matter how hard I shook the globe. Myself felt that stable. The world swirled around me, but nothing budged inside. There was a tight chain, not one I had to hold on to with my hands, but a heavy, steady anchor that seemed to go through the center of myself, from their hands on my head to the waters of Ganga beneath me. The energy flowing downward, the energy rising up, and an axis of still, spacious energy running through the center of myself. Sadhvi Bhagawati, Maharaji pronounced, and then said it again, emphasizing the word Sadhvi to the priest standing beside him. I opened my eyes. I did not realize they had removed their hands from my head, for even with open eyes, even seeing their hands back at their sides, Maharaji's right hand now on Swamiji's left shoulder, I could have sworn their hands were still there. They left an energetic impression on my head that is so strong I still feel its presence today. Swamiji, ever the mother, signaled for the priest to hand me a towel. I forgot that I was dripping wet. Go and change, Maharaji said. I would not wear any clothes I had previously worn again. A new sari, blouse and petticoat with, very thoughtfully, new undergarments were in a bag with the towel. The priest handed me the bag, and I walked toward the private changing area on the hut. As I peeled off my wet long robe and dried my body, my mind remained spacious, opening to vaster and vaster landscapes. The landscapes of my mind were not filled with artistic panoramic vistas. They were just space. It was not an absence of anything. The space itself was a presence, and it got wider and wider. I put on my new clothes, smiling at the embroidery in my new white sari. I had just renounced all attachments to form, all identification with the body, but the sweet woman from Delhi who brought me the new clothes to wear had known it was a special occasion, and so she assumed it deserved a special sari, one with delicate patterning and embroidery. Although sannyasis wear saffron, I continued to wear white. First, Swamiji worried that saffron robes would push my mother over the edge. She said as much. I associate orange only with Swamiji, and I know he doesn't speak to his parents at all. So, in my mind, I associate orange clothes with not speaking to your parents. I think my heart will stop every time I see you in that color. Swamiji had insisted that I get my parents' permission before taking sannyas, regardless of what color I was going to wear. So, on my visit to California, the previous winter, I had sought their blessings. Outwardly, they had seemed fine with the decision. I had been living in India for nearly 3 years then, and they had probably expected some such turn of events. When one is initiated into sannyas, it is considered a new birth. Traditionally, men emerge from Ganga naked like a newborn babe. Prior to the ordination ritual, a soon-to-be sannyasi performs several days of sacred fire ceremonies, including the literal cremation of one's past self. The birth name and all ties to that former self are burned in the sacred fire, and it's understood that the initiate will not be going back in thought or deed. In my case, a few exceptions were made due to my gender and culture. They had me emerge from Ganga still in my clothes and remove them only in the privacy of the changing room. I have also been permitted to share my story, to share my past, in order to inspire and help others, and for people to understand that I am not somehow different or holier or better. So, when I spoke to my parents to get their blessings on my decision, I assured them that I would still be able to be in touch with them, but that I was not permitted to use my birth name anymore. That would be burned in the fire. I was truly taking a new birth. It was okay with them, except the color. Just please don't wear that color, my mom said, or I'll keep dreading the day when you call and say I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I was also not eager to wear orange. Orange is the color of pumpkins, and pumpkins are conspicuous. I believed I blended more into the background in white. It was simple, subtle, and, I thought, unobtrusive. As a foreigner, I already stood out more than I wanted to. To add orange robes would be too much. So, for 10 years, I wore white, believing I blended in inconspicuously. But in April of 2010, a few months shy of the 10-year anniversary of my sannyas, Maharaji and Swamiji gave me saffron robes during the Mahakumbh Mela, after clearing it with my mother, of course, despite the fact that I was by then nearly 40. In the saffron robes, I was too embarrassed to walk outside. I feel like I'm wearing a neon sign, I told Pavani, a close friend. She laughed and said, "Neon sign? Not at all. Now you'll blend in. In white, you stood out." What? I couldn't believe it. Of course, she said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Here in India, everyone wears bright colors. Saffron looks like any other color, so you blend in. White is unusual. You really stood out all those years in white. Now you'll blend in nicely. Thank you for listening. That's the end of the 37th chapter. How lovely is it to go through this journey with dear Sadhvi ji. So much has happened. And yet, through all this happening with her, we return to the happening that is so simple and always there in the background as the foundation of our life. It is that very background of life we know as God, or spirit, or soul, that which is behind all the drama, holding it up as the firmament. So too, let us take inspiration from this and let go of the things that prevent us from seeing that divine reality amidst all of this whole world. Thank you and namaste.